I stepped into the courtroom with ice-cold hands, my thrifted suit feeling like a target. My ex-husband's lawyer smirked, reading my $34,000 salary out loud like it was a punchline. He told the judge I survived on mere crumbs while mocking my old car and boxed lunches. They saw a failed wife begging for scraps. They had no idea what actually sat inside my locked briefcase. My name is Harper Klein, and at 34 years old, I have spent enough time as an assistant court clerk at the Bay Ridge County Family Court to know exactly how a slaughter looks before it even begins. Usually, I am the one filing the motions or handing the judge a glass of water. Today, I was the one sitting at the scarred oak table, my fingers numb and my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, smelling of old paper and the bitter scent of cheap floor wax that had been buffed into the linoleum for 40 years. Across the aisle, Graham Sloan, my husband's high-priced attorney, straightened his silk tie and adjusted his designer glasses with the practiced grace of a predator. He did not just look at me, he looked through me. To him, I was a clerical error that needed to be erased. "Your Honor," Sloan began, his voice echoing with a smooth, condescending resonance that made my skin crawl. "Let us be realistic about the financial landscape here. The petitioner, Harper Klein, earns a staggering $34,000 a year. That is barely $2,800 a month before taxes. She lives on pocket change." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air like a bad smell. Behind him, my soon-to-be ex-husband, Wyatt Mercer, sat with his shoulders slumped in a performance of tragic regret. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than 3 months of my rent. He tilted his head slightly, giving me a look of fake, sickly sweet pity. It was the same look he used to give me when I would come home late from a double shift at the courthouse. Exhausted and covered in ink, Sloan continued, waving a stack of papers like they were a dirty rag. "We are talking about a woman who drives a 22-year-old sedan with a rusted fender. She lives in a 600-square-foot rental and carries her lunch to work in plastic containers every single day. She has no assets, no investments, and frankly, no fiscal value to this marriage. My client is being more than generous by offering a $5,000 settlement to just end this quietly." The presiding judge, a temporary appointment named Miller who looked like he hadn't slept since 1998, checked his watch. He tapped his gavel twice, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Miss Klein," the judge said, his voice dripping with boredom, "my docket is full for the next 6 hours. I have 3 custody hearings and a domestic dispute waiting in the hall. Please, keep your response brief. We are all aware of the disparity in income here. Let's not waste the court's time with sentimentality." He wasn't going to listen. None of them were. To this room, I was just a low-level civil servant who didn't know how to play the game. I took a slow, steady breath and reached down to the floor. I pulled up a heavy, black leather briefcase. It was sleek, modern, and looked entirely out of place next to my scuffed heels. I placed it on the table with a dull thud. "Your Honor," I said, my voice surprisingly level, "I would like to submit a set of supplemental documents for the court's consideration before we finalize any talk of settlements." Graham Sloan actually let out a short, bark-like laugh. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "What do you have in there?" "Harper, a collection of grocery store coupons. Maybe a few 100 frequent flyer miles you've been hoarding." A few people in the gallery chuckled. The sound felt like a physical slap, but I didn't flinch. I looked past the lawyer and fixed my eyes directly on Wyatt. He looked smug, as if he had already won. I remembered the night we signed our prenuptial agreement 3 years ago. He had pushed the pen into my hand and kissed my forehead, whispering into my ear with a voice like honey, "Don't worry about the fine print. Baby," he had said back then, "you just worry about the court papers. I'll worry about the money." I looked back at the briefcase and rested my hand on the cold leather, my fingers poised over the lock. I didn't open it yet, I wanted them to stew in their own arrogance a little longer. I only want to file my supplemental evidence before you gentlemen decide exactly how much I am worth. The laughter in the room didn't just fade, it died. I could see the confusion flickering in Wyatt's eyes, a tiny spark of fear beginning to catch. He didn't know that the woman he called a simple typist had been building a fortress while he was busy playing house. When I first met Wyatt, he was a master of the room. He worked in client development for a top-tier consulting firm, a job that required him to be 70% charisma and 30% silver-tongued lies. He had this way of looking at me, his eyes crinkling at the corners, that made me feel like I was the only woman in a room of 500 people. He made me feel chosen. It was the intoxicating cocktail of attention that I drank down until I was blind to the red flags. After the wedding, the cocktail turned to vinegar. Wyatt's world was built on a foundation of comparisons. Every dinner party with his colleagues became a silent competition. He would lean back with a glass of $50 scotch and talk about how his friends were buying yachts or summer homes in the Hamptons. Then, his gaze would land on me with a flicker of shame. To Wyatt, my job as an assistant court clerk wasn't a stable, respectable career in the justice system. It was a stain on his professional business card. It's just such a small life, isn't it? He would say after we got home, his voice trailing off as he loosened his tie. While I'm out there closing seven-figure deals, you're filling out forms for people who can't even pay their parking tickets. He grew obsessed with our image. He mocked me for my habit of tracking every cent in a ledger, a skill I had perfected during my years at the courthouse. He laughed when he caught me clipping digital coupons for the supermarket, calling it a peasant's hobby. Yet, I began to notice charges on our joint credit cards that didn't add up. $800 at a designer boutique here, $1,200 for a dinner at a steakhouse there. He was bleeding our accounts dry to buy the appearance of a man who belonged at the top, all while telling me to stop being so cheap. His mother, Evelyn Mercer, was the architect of his arrogance. She never yelled. Instead, she spoke in a soft, melodic tone that carried enough poison to kill a garden. She would visit our apartment, running a gloved finger over my bookshelves, before turning to me with a tight, artificial smile. "You really are the perfect little support system for my Wyatt," she told me over tea one Tuesday afternoon. "Every successful man needs a quiet background. You suit the role of a follower so well, dear. Please don't ever embarrass him by trying to be a leader." But they both underestimated me. They saw a quiet woman who filed papers, but they didn't see the woman who had spent a decade watching the most complex human dramas unfold in a courtroom. I had learned how to read people through their testimony. I knew the exact moment a witness was about to crack by the way they gripped their chair. I remembered every legal loophole, every obscure filing requirement, and every detail of every case that crossed my desk. And I had a secret. In the quiet hours after work, while Wyatt was out networking, I managed the books for a small logistics business that had belonged to my late aunt. I kept the job hidden because I knew Wyatt would hate anything he couldn't control. He viewed me as a decorative accessory, not a woman capable of handling a balance sheet. Wyatt started pressuring me to sign financial documents. He would slide a stack of papers across the kitchen island at 10 o'clock at night, his voice dropping into that honeyed tone he used on clients. "Just sign here, Harper. It's for a new investment account. It's just easier this way," he would murmur, leaning in to kiss my neck. "Trust me. We're husband and wife, aren't we?" I started noticing him coming home later and later. He would disappear for entire weekends, claiming he was networking in Chicago or D.C. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that I was just seeing shadows where there was only hard work. But the court clerk in me knew that when the evidence doesn't match the testimony, someone is lying. The mask finally slipped 3 months ago. Wyatt had come home in a foul mood after losing a contract. When I asked him if we could discuss the rising cost of our utilities, he snapped. He turned on me, his face contorted with a sneer I will never forget. "Utilities. You're worried about $50, he yelled, throwing his briefcase onto the sofa. "Shut up about the pennies, Harper. You have no idea how the real world works. You aren't a partner in this life. You're just a typist at the court. Stop acting like your opinion matters." He walked out of the room, leaving the insult hanging in the air like a physical wound. That was the moment the woman who had spent years being a support system decided to become the person who would bring his world crashing down. The turning point arrived in the form of an email from a man named Malcolm Red. The subject line was deceptively simple: Klein Holdings. In my world at the courthouse, a name like that usually meant a small-scale property dispute or a messy probate, but the sender was a senior partner at a firm that charged $800 an hour. He requested an urgent meeting to discuss the transition of my late Aunt Martha's estate. I met him in a glass-walled office that overlooked the harbor. Malcolm was a man who looked like he was made of iron and expensive wool. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Harper, your aunt wasn't just the owner of a local delivery service," Malcolm said, sliding a thick ledger across the desk. "She was the founding shareholder of Klein Northline Logistics. They handle cold chain storage for 90% of the pharmaceutical shipments on the East Coast. They are currently being vetted for a private equity buyout valued at over $1 billion. I felt the air leave my lungs. For years, Wyatt had laughed about Martha's small shop, calling it a quaint little hobby for an old woman who didn't understand the modern market. He had used her memory as a way to belittle my family's reach. "There is a specific clause in the trust," Malcolm continued, his eyes narrowing. "Your aunt was a brilliant woman who understood the risks of the world. She inserted a protective provision. If you are ever in a state of marital dispute involving signs of financial coercion, the entirety of her voting shares and the proceeds from the buyout transfer directly to your sole control. It bypasses any marital property laws. It stays yours, and only yours." My heart skipped a beat as the legal weight of those words settled. But then Malcolm's expression darkened. "However, someone has been asking questions. 2 weeks ago, a representative claiming to be your legal counsel contacted us. They tried to find a way to invalidate the protective clause. They had your social security number, your mother's maiden name, and several copies of your recent signatures. They were trying to gain access to the valuation files." The room felt cold. I thought back to the nights Wyatt had stayed up late, claiming he was doing research for a client. I remembered the way he had once volunteered to organize my filing cabinet at home, the one where I kept my personal records. I thought about the papers he had nudged me to sign, the ones he said were for an investment account. Malcolm, who would have that much of my personal data, I whispered, my voice trembling for the first time. "Someone very close to you, Harper," he replied grimly. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I went back to the courthouse and used my credentials to run a deep dive on my own credit history. My eyes blurred as I looked at the screen. There it was. A joint loan for $250,000, opened 4 months ago at a bank I had never stepped foot in. The application was digital, but the signature on the scanned PDF was a perfect, chilling replica of mine. I traced the metadata on the submission. It hadn't come from Wyatt's laptop. It had come from an IP address registered to his firm, specifically from the workstation of a junior administrative assistant named Sarah. Wyatt didn't just have an accomplice, he had a system. He was using a bored employee to forge my digital identity so he could drain my future before I even knew it existed. The anger was a hot, searing thing in my chest, but I forced it down. I had seen 1,000 people lose their cases because they let their emotions outpace their evidence. I wasn't going to be one of them. I picked up my phone and called Malcolm back. "I need you to prepare the full control package," I said, my voice as hard as the marble floors of the courthouse. "Every deed, every share certificate, every valuation. I want it all in a locked briefcase. Do not let anyone know we've spoken. Not even my own lawyer until I give the word." "Are you sure you want to wait?" Harper Malcolm asked. This is a lot of money to leave on the table while he's actively trying to steal it. I'm sure, I said. If I strike now, he'll find a way to lie out of it. I need him to think he's winning. I need him to walk into that courtroom believing I'm a penniless clerk with no cards left to play. I hung up and sat in the dark of my small office. I opened my court-issued notebook and flipped to a clean page. In the neat, precise handwriting I used for recording testimonies, I wrote a single sentence. Don't win with anger. Win with timing. I closed the book and felt the first spark of a cold, calculated peace. Wyatt wanted a fight about money. I was going to give him a war about an empire. The following Monday, Wyatt didn't come home with an argument. He came home with a spreadsheet. He laid it out on the marble kitchen island at 7 o'clock sharp, looking like a man who had just solved a world crisis. Harper. Let's be adults about this, he said, sliding a printed document toward me. I've tallied everything. The savings, the equity in the lease, the furniture. I'm prepared to give you $50,000 right now. It's more than you make in a year and a half. Just sign the acceptance of this distribution and we can just be done with this pain. I looked at the numbers. He had conveniently left out his recent bonuses and significantly undervalued our shared assets. I let my shoulders slump, making my voice sound thin and exhausted. I don't know. Wyatt, it's all so fast. I just need to think, I whispered, rubbing my temples. A flicker of triumph crossed his face. He thought he had broken me. Don't think too long. Harper, this offer won't stay on the table forever. You're clearly drowning in the stress of the court. Just sign it and find some peace. Over the next 48 hours. The pressure campaign intensified. My phone became a graveyard of unsolicited advice. Mrs. Gable, a longtime friend of Wyatt's mother, called me during my lunch break. Harper, honey, I heard about the trouble, she said, her voice dripping with that fake Southern sympathy she used to mask her condescension. You have to think about your reputation. If this goes to a full trial, everyone will see your finances. It's better to take the help Wyatt is offering. You're just not built for a fight like this. Then came the texts from Wyatt's colleagues, pretending to be concerned while subtly threatening my career. I didn't delete a single one. I archived them all. I met my best friend, Lena Ortiz, at a small bistro across from the Justice Center. Lena was a shark of a divorce lawyer who knew every dirty trick in the book. I handed her the spreadsheet Wyatt had given me. This is insulting, Lena hissed, circling the lowball figures with a red pen. He's trying to starve you out before you realize what he's actually worth. I can take him to the cleaners for this. Not yet, I said, leaning in. I need you to act as my official advisor, but you have to follow my lead. And Lena, there is something you need to know, but it cannot leave this table. Not a word to the court, not a word to the records. I am the sole heir to a logistics empire worth over $1 billion. Lena's fork hit her plate with a clatter. Her eyes went wide, and she started to speak, but I held up a hand. He doesn't know. He thinks he's stealing pennies from a clerk. I want him to keep thinking that until he commits a crime in front of a judge. The next day, I used my security clearance to pull the CCTV footage from the Hall of Records. I had a feeling about those missing files Malcolm mentioned. Sure enough, at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday 2 weeks ago, a night Wyatt claimed he was at the gym. There he was. He was caught on a grainy camera feed, lurking near the probate archives, talking to an administrative clerk I knew was deeply in debt. But Wyatt wasn't done playing dirty. That evening, Lena called me, her voice tense. He just filed an emergency motion. Harper. He's asking for temporary management of all joint accounts. He's claiming you are financially incompetent and mentally unstable due to the divorce. He submitted screenshots of your personal ledger with edited notes to make it look like you're losing your mind over grocery prices. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine, but I didn't cry. I sat down at my desk and began a timeline. I noted every lie, every forged signature I had discovered, and every time he had pressured me to sign away my rights. I wasn't a victim. I was a clerk of the court, and I knew how to build a case. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Malcolm. The buyout is moving at a breakneck pace. The private equity firm wants a signed letter of intent by the end of the month. If we don't lock down your control status within the next 14 days, Wyatt's lawyers could file a stay of execution on the trust, claiming marital interest. We need a resolution. I looked at the message, then at the stack of evidence I had gathered. I realized I couldn't just defend myself anymore. I had to lead Wyatt into the one place where his charisma wouldn't save him. I called Lena back. Let him have his hearing, I said, my voice steady. Tell the court we agree to an expedited session to discuss financial transparency. Let him bring his spreadsheets and his fake screenshots. I'm going to lead him right to the edge. And then I'm going to let him jump. Harper. Are you sure? Lena asked, her voice filled with a mix of worry and excitement. If this backfires, he could lock up your accounts for months. He thinks I'm a typist, I replied. He's about to find out that the person who types the records is the one who decides what the history books say. Wyatt started the fire on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock sharp. He posted a mournful black and white photo of our empty kitchen on his social media page with a caption about the unbearable weight of supporting a partner who refused to grow. By noon, 50 of our mutual friends had liked the post. His colleagues left comments calling me a parasite and a drain on his bright future. I sat in my small office at the courthouse during my 15-minute break, watching the numbers climb. I didn't cry. Instead, I spent the next hour capturing every screenshot, saving the metadata, and logging the exact timestamps. In the world of Bay Ridge County Family Court, these weren't just insults. They were Exhibit A in a case for intentional emotional distress. The psychological warfare shifted gears that evening. A delivery driver arrived at my apartment with a massive bouquet of white lilies and a handwritten note from Wyatt. It said he was sorry for his temper and that he just wanted us to find our way back to the love we had 3 years ago. 2 hours later, an email hit my inbox from his personal account. It was a cold, formal threat stating that if I didn't sign his settlement offer by Friday at 5 o'clock, he would sue me for every penny of the legal fees he was accruing. He was a man spinning in circles, trying to find which version of himself would make me break first. On Thursday, his mother, Evelyn Mercer, called and insisted on meeting for coffee at a high-end bistro where the tea cost $12 a cup. She sat across from me, looking perfectly polished in her pearls, her eyes scanning my modest work suit with a pity that felt like a physical weight. Harper, dear, you must see that a woman should know her place in a situation like this, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. You aren't equipped for a public battle. If you just sign Wyatt's papers and walk away quietly, the family is prepared to give you a one-time payment of $25,000. It's more than enough for someone with your modest needs. I leaned back, my silence stretching until she began to fidget with her gold watch. I didn't argue about the money or her condescension. I leaned in and asked a single, quiet question. Evelyn, who exactly told you about Klein Holdings? She blinked, her composure fracturing for a split second. Her hand shook as she reached for her sugar spoon. Wyatt has... He has been consulting with a very high-level financial advisor, Harper. He was told to look into how to properly value any potential inheritance to ensure the marital estate is handled with total transparency. He was only trying to protect your shared interests. There it was, the confirmation I needed. Wyatt wasn't just guessing. He was actively hunting my aunt's legacy. He had already started the process of trying to put a price tag on a billion-dollar empire he had no right to touch. When I got home, I did a deep dive into our joint streaming and software accounts. I found what I was looking for buried in a sub-menu of our shared family plan. There was a monthly charge of $49.99 for a service called SignLogic Pro, a high-end software used for digital signature simulation and document scanning. It had been active for 4 months. It was the smoking gun for the forged signatures on the loan documents. Wyatt was so arrogant that he had used our shared account to buy the very tools he used to rob me. I called Lena immediately. I have the motive and I have the method. I told her. We have enough for a restraining order and a claim of financial coercion, Lena replied, her voice crackling with professional intensity. But we need the perfect moment to drop the hammer. If we file now, they might find a way to bury the evidence before the hearing. Wait, I said, looking at a notification on my legal portal. He just made the first move for me. Wyatt had just filed a formal affidavit with the court. He accused me of willful concealment of substantial assets and requested that the judge force me to produce every single financial record, trust document, and bank statement from the last 5 years. He thought he was cornering me, forcing me to admit to the wealth he so desperately craved. He had no idea that by demanding those records, he had legally waived his right to privacy and opened the door for me to enter the courtroom not as a clerk, but as the owner of the empire he was trying to steal. Let him have his discovery, I told Lena. I'm going to give him exactly what he asked for, but he's not going to like the price of the admission. Malcolm sat across from me in his glass-walled office, the late afternoon sun casting long, sharp shadows over the stacks of corporate ledgers. He didn't speak in the flowery language Wyatt used to charm clients. He spoke in the language of infrastructure and ironclad contracts. Klein Northline Logistics isn't glamorous. Harper, Malcolm said, tapping a pen against a thick report. We don't make apps or sell luxury goods. We own the cold chain storage and transportation for 40% of the perishable food and medical supplies on the eastern seaboard. We have 10-year contracts with 3 of the largest retail chains in the country and 15 regional hospital networks. It is a machine that generates $85 million in pure profit every 12 months. And now, with the buyout offer on the table, the valuation has spiked to $1.08 billion. I wasn't surprised by the numbers. Wyatt always thought I was just a typist. But for the last 5 years, I had been Aunt Martha's silent partner. I was the one who suggested she switch to automated inventory tracking. I was the one who found the 7% leak in the fuel budget that saved the company $4 million in a single quarter. Martha didn't leave me this empire because I was her niece. She left it to me because I was the only person who understood how to keep the gears turning. The following morning, I attended my first board meeting via video call. I sat in my small kitchen, wearing my best professional blazer, while 5 men in their 60s stared back at me from a boardroom in Manhattan. With all due respect, one man named Arthur said, his voice dripping with skepticism. We are in the middle of a $1 billion acquisition. We have concerns about a court assistant having the final say on the indemnity clauses. This isn't a traffic ticket. Miss Klein. I didn't blink. I opened the digital file on my laptop and shared my screen. Arthur, if you look at the New Jersey Transit contract on page 42, you will see that your legal team missed a critical liability cap. If a single refrigeration unit fails under the current wording, the company is liable for 100% of the cargo value plus consequential damages. That is a $200 million blind spot. The silence that followed was absolute. Arthur's mouth thinned into a straight line. I was under the impression that the legal department had vetted that thoroughly. Arthur stammered. They didn't. I replied coldly. I did their job for them. Now, let's move on to the shareholder security report. The mood shifted instantly. I presented an internal audit that Malcolm had commissioned. Someone had tried to bypass the shareholder encryption 3 times in the last week. The IP address was masked, but the physical location of the server hop was in the 3-block radius surrounding Wyatt's consulting firm. Lena, who was listening in on a private line, messaged me immediately. If he's using company computers to hunt your private trust data, Harper, that is a massive breach of ethics. If he's billing his time to clients while doing it, it's fraud. I knew exactly who to call. Noah Briggs was a senior associate at Wyatt's firm who had been passed over for a promotion last year because Wyatt had taken credit for his work. Harper, why are you calling me Noah? Asked when he picked up, his voice cautious. Noah, I'm going to ask you a very specific question. I said, have you noticed Wyatt Mercer using the firm's research tools for non-client matters lately? Specifically, anything involving probate or logistics companies. There was a long pause. I could hear Noah's heavy breathing. He's been obsessed, Harper. He's been logging 12-hour days, but he's not working on the Miller account. He's been using the junior staff to pull deep dive reports on Klein Northline. He even told the partners he was vetting a lead for a potential merger. He's been billing those hours to the firm's general overhead. I have the digital logs of the attempted breaches. Noah, I said, if I send them to you, can you make sure they get to the right person in compliance? If I do this... Wyatt is finished, Noah whispered. He'll be fired for cause. He might even lose his license. He's trying to steal $1 billion from me. Noah, I replied. He's already finished. I'm just providing the evidence. I didn't want a messy public scandal. I wanted a surgical strike. I sent the packet of evidence, the IP logs, the timestamps, and the forged signature samples directly to the firm's chief compliance officer. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from Noah. The partners just called Wyatt into a private office. Security is standing by his desk with boxes. Beside compliance, the executive board is in a frenzy. Wyatt is hyperventilating. The game has changed. Harper. I looked at the message and felt a cold sense of satisfaction. Wyatt had spent years telling me I was small. Now, he was about to find out how it felt to be erased by the very system he tried to manipulate. The heavy weight of the black leather briefcase felt different now. Inside were the Empire papers, the documents that would officially end the version of me that Wyatt Mercer thought he owned. Malcolm had spent 48 hours straight finalizing the transition of control resolution, the certified trust deed, and the official letter of intent for the buyout. The valuation was staring back at me in bold, black ink, $1,080 million. It was a number so large it felt abstract, yet it was the only thing keeping my world from spinning off its axis. I spent the evening in my small living room, practicing my testimony in front of a mirror. I didn't want to show anger or triumph. I needed to be the woman I had been for 10 years at the courthouse, precise, cold, and anchored by procedure. I didn't need to perform. I just needed to lay the truth on the table in the correct order. Lena sat on my velvet sofa, her laptop open as she refined her cross-examination. I have the trap set. Harper, she said, her eyes flashing with a predatory glint. I'm going to ask him about his knowledge of your family assets. I'm going to let him lie, and then I'm going to show the court that he knew about the logistics empire before he even filed for divorce. We're going to prove he wasn't just leaving a marriage, he was staging a heist. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a voice note from Wyatt. I hit play, and his voice filled the room, trembling and thick with what sounded like tears. Harper, please. I made such a mistake, he sobbed, the sound distorted by the speaker. I've been so stressed with work and everything is falling apart. I don't want the money. Baby, I just want us back. Please. Can we just talk tonight? Less than 10 minutes later, a formal email arrived from his attorney, Graham Sloan. It was a draft for a strict non-disclosure agreement. It stated that I would be legally barred from ever discussing Wyatt's financial conduct or his professional dealings in exchange for a slightly higher settlement. The contrast was sickening. The sobbing man on the voice note was the same man trying to gag me with a legal contract before I could expose his fraud. He's desperate, Lena noted, skimming the email. He knows the walls are closing in. But I had found something even more damning. While digging through the public business registry, I discovered a newly formed entity, Mercer Legacy Partners Limited Liability Company. It had been registered just 3 weeks ago. The registered agent Evelyn Mercer. The business description was listed as strategic consulting, but the linked accounts showed it was set up to receive a massive finder's fee from a broker who had been sniffing around the Klein Northline buyout. Wyatt wasn't just trying to get half of my inheritance, he was trying to divert the commissions into a shell company owned by his mother. If this trial drags on, I told Malcolm over the phone, the private equity firm might get cold feet. They won't touch a company with a contested ownership during an acquisition this big. We have to end this in the next hearing. Then we file under seal. Malcolm replied, "We asked the judge for a closed session to present the confidential valuation documents. It keeps the press out and forces the judge to see the scale of what is at stake without giving Wyatt a chance to leak the details to stall the deal." The final blow to Wyatt's confidence came late that night from Noah. He sent me a photo of a memo that had been circulated at the firm. Wyatt had been placed on immediate administrative leave. The investigation into his fraudulent billing and unauthorized use of firm resources had turned up enough evidence to suggest criminal intent. He was no longer the golden boy of client development. He was a liability in an expensive suit. Lena stood up to leave, packing her files into her bag. She looked at me, her expression softening for just a moment before the professional mask returned. "Get some sleep." "Harper," she said, her voice steady. "Tomorrow morning, they are going to sit in that courtroom and they are going to laugh at your salary. They are going to make jokes about your old car and your boxed lunches. And then you are going to let them swallow every single one of those laughs, with the weight of their own ink." I locked the door after she left and sat in the silence of my apartment. I didn't feel like a billionaire. I felt like a clerk who was finally ready to file the most important record of her life. The time for anger was over. Tomorrow was about the numbers. The air in the courtroom felt like it was being sucked out of the room by an industrial vacuum. Wyatt was the first to take the stand, and he played his part with the precision of a seasoned actor. He sat there with his shoulders slumped, wearing a look of practiced heartbreak that he probably spent an hour perfecting in front of his bathroom mirror this morning. I just don't recognize her anymore." "Your Honor," Wyatt said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was just loud enough for the court reporter to catch. "She has become so cold, so obsessed with power. I only ever wanted to provide a good life for us. But now she is being so cruel. She is trying to take things that she never even cared about when we were happy." Graham Sloan smoothed the front of his $3,000 suit and walked toward the bench with an arrogant swagger. "Your Honor, we need to look at the reality of this marriage. Miss Klein is a low-level assistant clerk. She spends her days filing fees and organizing stamp pads for $34,000 a year. She has zero experience with high-level corporate structures or complex financial management. She simply does not understand the business world my client inhabits. To her, every dollar is a mountain because she has so few of them." Lena stood up, her voice sharp and commanding. "Your Honor, my client understands the business world perfectly well. In fact, we have a series of text messages from Mr. Mercer sent at 10 o'clock at night where he explicitly pressured her to sign away her rights under extreme emotional duress." Graham let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Duress, Your Honor. It is just a normal marital disagreement. Couples argue about money and contracts all the time. It is hardly a legal basis for a claim of coercion. When I was called to the stand, the silence in the room was heavy. I sat down and adjusted the microphone, keeping my spine as straight as a steel rod. Graham approached me, his eyes full of a condescending smirk that made my skin crawl. "Miss Klein, let us be very clear for the record," Graham said, leaning in close. "Your total personal savings across all accounts amount to exactly $4,216. Is that correct?" "Yes," I replied, my voice as level as a horizon line. "And you have no independent investments, no brokerage accounts, and no property in your name. Based on the documents I have been forced to provide so far, that is correct." Graham turned to the judge, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "Then I would like to submit this. It is the comprehensive asset disclosure prepared by Mr. Mercer. On page 4, it clearly indicates that Miss Klein has 0 shares in any commercial entities or holdings. And look, Your Honor, Right there at the bottom is her digital signature, dated November 14th. Miss Klein, will you swear under oath that this document accurately reflects the total lack of assets in your name? I reached out and took the paper. I didn't look at the text. I looked at the metadata printed in the tiny gray footer. I had spent 10 years at this courthouse. I had seen thousands of these files. I knew the exact version of the software we used for verification. The signature was a masterpiece, but it was a forged one. The encryption timestamp followed a format that hadn't been updated in the state system until November 16th. He had used his new software to backdate a lie. I cannot swear to the accuracy of this document, I said. Graham sighed, shaking his head. Your Honor, she is being difficult. She is just trying to stall the inevitable. Lena was on her feet before he could finish. Your Honor, we move to submit rebuttal documents into the record immediately. We have evidence that directly contradicts the validity of this disclosure and calls into question the integrity of the petitioner's entire filing. The judge rubbed his temples and looked at his watch. This was supposed to be a 30-minute hearing. I am not inclined to drag this out with more paper or last-minute surprises. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the wooden surface of the witness stand. I didn't look at the judge. I looked directly at Wyatt. He was staring at me, his eyes wide, a thin bead of sweat beginning to form on his upper lip. He knew exactly what was in that briefcase next to Lena. Your Honor, I said, my voice echoing through the silent room. If the court does not accept this document right now, you will be making a final ruling based on a forged signature. The judge froze. He looked at me, then at the document in my hand, and then at the pale, shaking man sitting behind the defense table. The air in the room seemed to crackle with static. 10-minute recess. The judge barked, slamming his gavel down with a sound that felt like a gunshot. I want both counsel in my chambers the second I finish reviewing the new submission. The judge stood up and swept out of the room. The gallery immediately erupted into a frantic whisper. Wyatt sat there, looking at me like I was a ticking bomb that had just been placed in his lap. He didn't know the explosion was already happening. During the 10-minute break, the courthouse hallway felt like a pressure cooker. I stood by the tall, arched windows, watching the rain streak against the glass. When my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown number, I opened it, and my breath hitched. Harper, stop this now. The message read, we can talk in private. I will share enough with you to make sure you are at peace for the rest of your life. Just do not do anything stupid in that room. Let us just settle this between us. I stared at the screen. He had just handed me the one thing I needed, an admission that there was something to share. If I was just a penniless clerk, what could he possibly share? I didn't reply. I walked over to Lena and held the phone out. She read it, her eyes widening behind her spectacles. He is panicking, Lena whispered. He just admitted to having knowledge of assets he claimed did not exist. I am adding this to the record immediately as evidence of ongoing financial coercion. When the bailiff called us back into the room, the atmosphere was even more suffocating. Graham Sloan did not wait for the judge to sit down before he launched a new offensive. Your Honor, before we proceed, we have an emergency motion. Graham barked. We have reason to believe that the respondent, Harper Klein, is attempting to tarnish my client's reputation to hide her own financial misconduct. We move to immediately freeze any and all assets in her name, including any undeclared trusts or holdings, to prevent her from dissipating the marital estate before a final valuation. It was a desperate move to seize control of the empire before the buyout could close, but before the judge could respond, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Malcolm Red walked in, looking like a grim reaper in a charcoal suit. He carried a notarized packet of digital forensics. Your Honor, Malcolm said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. I am the guardian of the Klein North Line Trust. I am here to present evidence of a series of unauthorized, illegal attempts to breach the security of the shareholder registry. These attempts were made using the respondent's personal identification data, routed through a server located at the petitioner's place of employment. The judge looked at the documents Malcolm handed up. At the same time, Lena's tablet chimed with an incoming file from Noah. "We also have internal logs from Mr. Mercer's firm," Lena added, her voice echoing. "They show that over the last 3 months, Wyatt Mercer directed a junior administrative assistant to print probate and trust documents during billable hours, charging the time to a general client overhead. This is not just a marital dispute, Your Honor. It is a documented history of fraud and identity theft." Wyatt's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. He looked at his lawyer, then at his mother in the gallery, but both of them were looking away. He suddenly stood up, his hands shaking so violently they rattled the table. I was under so much pressure," Wyatt stammered, his voice breaking as he looked toward the bench with watery eyes. "The firm, they expect so much. My mother, Graham, they told me I had to be aggressive to protect our future. Harper, I am so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I just wanted us to be secure." He was crying now, a pathetic, desperate sound, but he didn't once say he didn't want the money. He was still trying to play the victim, still trying to manipulate the room with his crumbling charisma. The judge looked at Wyatt with pure, unadulterated disgust before turning his gaze to me. "Miss Klein," the judge said, his voice heavy, "the petitioner has made an accusation of asset concealment. I am going to ask you directly, under oath, are you hiding substantial assets from this court?" The room went so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioner. I looked at the judge, then at Wyatt. I didn't feel the nervousness that had plagued me all morning. I felt a cold, crystalline clarity. "I am not hiding anything, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and resonant. "I have simply been waiting for the proper procedural moment to submit the correct documentation. I did not want to submit these papers until I was certain the petitioner had finished testifying to his own version of the facts. Now that he has, I request that the court open the supplemental filing we submitted under seal this morning." Lena stood up and placed her hand firmly on the locked briefcase. She looked at Graham Sloan, who looked like he wanted to vanish through the floorboards. "Your Honor," Lena said, her voice filled with a quiet, lethal triumph. "We would like to formally present to the court the Empire Papers." I reached down and entered the final digit of the code. The metallic snap of the locks felt like a gunshot in the stagnant air of the courtroom. I pulled out the documents one by one, laying them across the table with a slow, deliberate rhythm that forced everyone to watch. First, the certified trust deed. Then, the board resolution for the transfer of control. Finally, I placed the valuation summary on top. The bold heading in the center of the page was impossible to miss: $1,080,000,000. The silence that followed was heavy, almost physical. Graham Sloan stood frozen, his hand still hovering over his own pathetic spreadsheet as if he had forgotten how to move. Wyatt's face didn't just turn pale. The blood seemed to drain out of him entirely, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent gray. The man who had spent the last hour mocking my $34,000 salary looked like he was about to vomit. "Your Honor," Lena said, her voice cutting through the silence like a diamond. "As per the protective clause in the Klein-Northline Trust, any evidence of financial coercion or forgery by a spouse triggers an immediate and irrevocable separation of assets. Mr. Mercer has no claim to these shares. In fact, his attempt to freeze my client's accounts is not just a waste of this court's time. It is a bad faith attempt to interfere with a billion-dollar corporate acquisition." Malcolm stepped forward, his expression as cold as a winter morning. "I am submitting the digital logs now. Your Honor, we have captured every single IP address and every timestamp associated with the petitioner's attempts to hack into the shareholder records. It wasn't a stranger. It was Wyatt Mercer, using his firm's resources to steal what didn't belong to him. Lena didn't stop there. She held up the asset report Wyatt had submitted earlier, the one with my forged signature. We have the metadata, Your Honor. The digital signature was generated using software purchased on a joint account just 48 hours before this filing. The format is incorrect for the state system because it was faked. He lied to this court under oath to facilitate a theft. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Wyatt. The boredom I had seen on his face earlier was gone, replaced by a sharp, focused anger. He didn't see a successful consultant and a poor clerk anymore. He saw a predator who had been caught in his own trap. Motion to freeze assets is denied. The judge barked, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. In fact, I am referring this entire file to the district attorney's office for an immediate investigation into forgery, identity theft, and perjury. I will not have my courtroom used as a tool for a heist. Wyatt tried to stand up, his legs wobbling as he reached out toward me. Harper, please, we can just talk for a second. I was so scared of losing you, he stammered, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Sit down, Mr. Mercer, the judge snapped. I am issuing a permanent order of protection. You are to have zero contact with Miss Klein. You will not call her. You will not email her, and you will stay 500 feet away from her at all times. If you use a third party to harass her, you will be in contempt. Graham Sloan tried to find his voice, his arrogance replaced by a desperate, frantic energy. Your Honor, she concealed these assets. She lied by omission. The judge looked at the lawyer with a look that could have withered stone. No, Mr. Sloan, you spent this morning ridiculing her salary to distract me from the fact that your client was trying to rob her. This hearing is adjourned. I stood up and packed the Empire papers back into my briefcase. I walked past the defense table, stopping just inches away from Wyatt. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and empty. The mask of the successful businessman completely shattered. You spent years telling me I was just a number on a payroll. Wyatt, I said, my voice quiet but loud enough for everyone in the front row to hear. You thought I was the one who worked for the system, but the truth is, I am the one who holds the hammer. And today, I finally decided to let it fall. I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned and walked out of the double doors, my heels clicking firmly on the marble floor. As I reached the hallway, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a call from the board of Klein Northline Logistics. Harper Malcolm's voice came through, sounding relieved. The private equity group just saw the court's ruling on the docket. They are ready to sign. The deal is closed. Behind me. I heard the final, thunderous strike of the judge's gavel. It sounded like the end of a very long, very loud lie. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please leave a comment below to let me know where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts on this journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.